As I was making this video, I realized that the main truth conveyed is that I have no idea what the truth actually is, and I believe that's by design. It's tough to firmly place your feet on the ground when the foundation is built upon sand, you know? As Orwell said, political language is designed to make lies sound truthful and to make murder respectable, and to give an appearance of solidity to pure wind. So keep in mind, I'm trying to figure this out for myself too. I'm going to do my best to give you my perspective, but it's complicated. With that said, where did we leave off with the last video? At the end, I was connecting the 2024 election to this plan for the global economy, connecting the assassination attempts, the lawfare, and basically, it's just a stop Trump no matter what type of situation. That way, not only will the war machine continue marching forward, but they can also continue building out their new carbon-based system. Now it's true, the domestic reasons and the global reasons slightly differ, but at its core, it's still all about maintaining global hegemonic power. In that video, I asked you a question. Do you believe that war could be baked into their plans for this so-called transition? Something they always believed could be used as a catalyst. If you think about it, war could ease the public into accepting increased surveillance of domestic populations, along the lines of the Patriot Act. You know, we have seen this before. The war could also be used as a pitch for digital ID, monitoring your activity, tracking citizens, and facial recognition to parse out spies. But as we know, the digital ID is the key to their financial infrastructure as well. That's how they plan to disperse quote-unquote benefits in the future. They call it programmability. And so, in that vein, universal basic income could be introduced as a modern type of war ration, and on it goes. I could go through each aspect of their agenda and give you a method of implementation based on a wartime scenario. But how could it be used to usher in a new economic system? Well, I was saying that they could use the war as a pretext for targeting the BRIC financial system and to solidify the so-called New World Order that they all love to talk about.
There's no longer any doubt that humans are heating up the oceans, land, and sea by burning fossil fuels.
The world has to overcome not only the damage done to our economies and our societies by COVID-19, it also has to confront the repercussions.
سرعة التغيير القادمة أكبر بكثير مما نتوقع.
I see a future where the internet is available for free for everyone, and that means the location of power is going to shift. Decentralization of power structures everywhere may be the beginning of that shift in finance, in political power.
We have to uphold our responsibility, which we have towards the next generation.
But it could also wipe off national debt as well, a true global reset of sorts. Hence the name, the Great Reset. Now, if you listen carefully to their speeches, everything revolves around creating this new economic system.
What underpins a world order is always the financial system. I was very privileged. My father was an advisor to Nixon when they came off the gold standard in '71, and so I was brought up with a kind of inside view of how very important the financial structure is to absolutely everything else. And what we're seeing in the world today, I think, is we are on the brink of a dramatic change where we are about to, and I'll say this boldly, we're about to abandon the traditional system of money and accounting and introduce a new one.
The current pandemic has brought unimaginable devastation to people's lives, livelihoods, and national economies. At the same time, the green recovery represents an unprecedented opportunity to rethink and reset the ways in which we live and do business. Now, I've long believed that we need a shift in our economic model that places nature and the world's transition to net zero at the heart of how we operate, prioritizing the pursuit of sustainable, inclusive growth in the decades to come.
What we want to do in Davos this year in this respect is to push the reset button. Let me explain.
In the midst of a crisis that is now, I hope, well understood, Global warming, climate change, and the devastating loss of biodiversity are the greatest threats humanity has ever faced, and one largely of our own creation. In order to secure our future and to prosper, we need to evolve our economic model.
And so, if it's all about that, then I believe the environmental angle is just the method to get there. It's a way of gaining public support for something clearly detrimental to everybody's well-being, trying to save the Earth from catastrophe. Yeah, that's a high-tier manipulation to gain said public support. I mean, who could be against saving the Earth, you know? Exactly. Low information voters plus emotionally charged messaging equals a winning formula, and they know this. Although, this is the reason why I believe war could be inevitable. We have two economic systems, and both are in the beginning stages of development. We have the BRIC financial system and the West's new carbon-based system. Now, despite what everybody claims, I find it highly unlikely that the US establishment and the West in general are going to be okay with a multipolar world. And that's because it contradicts every other statement about a one-world system and their hopes of creating a one-world currency. They can't have it both ways. A multipolar world where the US is not a superpower anymore, like the World Economic Forum alludes to, or a one-world system that surely the West will dominate. Those visions are not compatible with each other at all. We are being lied to on multiple fronts. The thing is, as we all know, economics and war go hand in hand. In my opinion, there can only be one winner here, and the winner is going to control investment for the next 100 years. Now, there are some blatant inconsistencies too. Restitutor over on X showed me some aspects to the BRIC system, and as it turns out, they are moving towards a carbon-based system too. They showed me the overall goal. The BRIC system wants to get rid of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank in favor of their own version. They want an alternative to SWIFT payment processing and to ensure the US dollar is not the global reserve, which raises some interesting questions. So, we all know that Klaus Schwab cozies up to Xi and China all the time, even going as far as saying that China is a model for the world. And it kinda seems to me that the WEF has backroom deals with both the West and the East. If that's the case, then whoever wins, the new system will in fact be carbon-based. And I believe there's a reason for this. The windfall from carbon taxes will be massive, absolutely massive, taxing people for everything under the sun, quite literally. If everyone agrees to a carbon-based system, then the carbon taxes will still flow into the global governance infrastructure no matter what, no matter who wins. The thing that we have to keep in mind is that the US and our tax dollars are basically funding this entire thing. Our taxes are spread throughout the entire world. Our funding of global initiatives is insane, ridiculous spending. Now, if the US begins to decline, losing superpower status, then you have to replace that money. Otherwise, economic degrowth will end up being a complete collapse instead. And so, in response to that problem, they create the predatory carbon-based tax system to siphon wealth from everybody on the planet and use that to continue funding the development goals. It's quite the method to satiate their greed and lust for power. After all, as they say, the Green Revolution is a $50 trillion opportunity, right? Yeah, stealing that money from you. But we still have some contradictions to sort out. However, I'm pretty sure it's impossible. So to keep things simple, I'll give you two possible paths. Option A, World War. The conflict will determine which economic system is dominant and who controls global investment, wiping the slate clean along the way. Option B, as we've heard many times, the entire world is a stage. And we are being played by everybody. They're all in on it, every nation, and the rest is just, political theater.
There is another very important phase of warfare. It has as its target not the body, but the mind of the enemy.
The target of psychological warfare is against the enemy's mind.
It is words and ideas.
The ammunition used by war.
Oftentimes, when it comes to politics, nothing is real. However, I will say, that's also a dangerous proposition, just in a psychological sense. We need some kind of anchor to reality here. I don't think it's healthy to have the outlook that everything is fake and everything's a game. But to be honest, who knows? That could be the reality. I mean, even something simple such as their job reports, even those are fake. You always see a revision come out a couple months later, proving everything they said was a lie, and they knew it was a lie. So, I don't know what to tell you. At the very least, we have to try to find that anchor. When it comes to China, we know they want to model their control grid after theirs. Technocracy and controlling citizens is the China playbook.
The World Economic Forum has been
involved in China since 1979, and we have been part of the development of this country now for nearly 30 years.
I respect China's achievements, which are tremendous over the last over 40 years. I think it's a role model for many countries. The Chinese model is certainly a very attractive model for quite a number of countries.
We have been part of the development of this country now for nearly 30 years.
Now let's talk about Russia, because I've had many questions about their role in this quote-unquote new system, basically ever since they were put in charge of running Cyber Polygon. I mean, every nation in the West is warning about Russian cyber attacks, and then they put Russia in charge of the cyber pandemic simulation. I mean, what's that about?
Pay insufficient attention to the frightening scenario of a comprehensive cyber attack, which would bring to a complete halt to the power supply, transportation, hospital services, our society as a whole. The COVID-19 crisis would be seen in this respect as a small disturbance in comparison to a major cyber attack.
So yeah, let me know what you think about all of that. However, there is a reason as to why the globalists are so concerned about the 2024 election. Trump might be the only chance we have to avoid this future. And that's because everybody else in politics is all in on this grand vision. Now let's assume that I and many of you are right, and Trump's our only shot to avoid this future. If the global regime understands that everything they've been trying to build since at least the early 1970s is threatened, what would they do? I'm pretty sure anything and everything, including the old assassination route. However, we also have some warning signs from our own federal agencies. First, they gave us a warning about a potential cyber attack on election infrastructure. It could be Iran, China, or Russia, or that could just be the story we get, and it's really a subversion from our own political class. That's the real tricky aspect these days. We never know what the truth is. And you can't trust media, so I wish I had better advice, but this is the post-truth world that they have created. But yeah, after they warned us about a cyber attack, now we have this. We're getting stories about widespread problems with the US mail system, and how that could disrupt voting. And then of course we have other propaganda articles claiming that we might not know who won the election for days or weeks. And it's amazing that people buy that. This is not normal, nor has it ever been normal. There is no reason for this to be the case. But you know, the establishment, they have to know that if anything quote-unquote off happens with this election, then it's over. The illusion of choice will be forever broken. Now to me, we seem very close to the establishment just openly embracing the deep state. Now, if their goal is to end national sovereignty and move into this global governance system, then that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? You guys remember this, we started off with the deep state's not real. And then we very, very quickly moved into, alright, the deep state is real, but it's awesome, from the New York Times. Yeah. And up next, they're probably just going to end the charade. And politicians will openly pitch being ruled by the administrative state, the collective. Yes, but then, we also got a bunch of articles claiming that the Constitution is dangerous and we should quote-unquote rewrite it. What can you even say at this point? They want to fundamentally change the US governance system to align with this global vision. It's all about incremental steps, right? So anyway, let's move on to the global shock report. And oddly enough, the 2024 election is a major highlight. And I noticed some real coping happening in the subtext. It's subtle, but you can tell they are coping pretty damn hard. You're going to see in a moment, they're claiming that even if Trump wins and the US backs out of their global government plan, well, they claim it doesn't matter, and they're going to move forward without us. And that sounds like a giant cope to me. The truth is, I don't think they can succeed without subjugating the United States. The US establishment has to be all in on this vision, as we're essentially bankrolling the entire thing with our tax money. This includes Agenda 2030 and the so-called Green Revolution. All of it's backed by our money and the threat of our bombs. Without the United States, it fails. So let's make sure they fail. Yeah. Anyway, some interesting points in their 2024 Global Shock Report. The article highlights say, and I quote, "The post-pandemic era is shaped by a heightened global risk and unpredictable shock events."
And the last factor I want to mention is resilience, the capability to bounce back, because there will be certainly what we call the black swans, the unpleasant surprises which will come in our way. The most important factor to master the future is leadership.
Ah yes, the black swan, unpredictable shock events, they say. But I have to say, to the contrary, it's easy to predict the shocks when you intentionally create them. Next they say, and I quote again, "Power is dispersing in a post-superpower era, while governments struggle with a reoccurring crisis of political legitimacy worldwide." Well, do you want to know how they could restore legitimacy of government? They could, they could stop acting like tyrannical psychopaths. Suppressing free speech, censorship, putting people in jail for thought crimes, and they could stop with the two-tiered system, but they'll never do that. The political crisis is the imperative to the change. None of this is organic. And then finally, and I quote again, "The lingering pandemic mental health crisis is being exacerbated by climate and AI." End of quote. You know, that perfectly encapsulates why these governments are not considered legitimate by anybody with critical thinking skills. And that's because it's pure nonsense. The post-pandemic mental health crisis. You mean the mental health crisis that you perpetuated? Yeah, okay. And you're saying that's being exacerbated by climate. Alright, sure. It's tough to even come up with something to say for this. What a stupid, stupid statement. First of all, the pandemic was an exercise in breaking people. The mental health crisis appears to have been a hallmark of their entire strategy. What do you call making people fear for their lives every moment of the day for something that, in general, you probably had about a 99% survival rate? And they're still out there pushing the same tired propaganda about it too. You can see it to this day. And then to claim it's being exacerbated by climate, that makes no sense. But besides that, the entire climate change agenda is a mental health crisis unto itself. It's all based upon fear. All you have to do is just listen to that guy Antonio Gutierrez whenever he speaks.
Our focus here is on climate solutions, and our task is urgent. Humanity has opened the gates of hell.
The politics of fear. It's a powerful thing. Their propaganda is making people believe that the entire world is going to spontaneously combust within a few years. Unless, of course, you give up your personal agency, freedom, and your rights. The real funny part, for lack of a better word, is the fact that every few years, they change the timeline, but still say, we only have a couple years left. They've been doing this for decades. And I don't know how people still fall for it, to be honest. And on top of that, they're not only being told that the only way to avoid calamity is by giving up freedom, but also your financial well-being. And of course, you have to give up having a family too. Otherwise, the entire human race will explode in a crescendo of carbon-fueled infernos. Yeah, they actively promote a mental health crisis every single day. It's the bedrock to their entire strategy. The irony is just too much. I can't take it.
There's really no polite way to put it. The climate crisis is killing people. It is knowingly, wittingly allowing people to die and infecting them with disease and providing them with air that kills people because we're not willing to take the steps necessary to do what we know we need to do. And every year now, millions of people around this planet are dying because fossil fuel and methane emissions, called greenhouse gas pollution. Those methane emissions and CO2 emissions and nitrous oxide and other emissions are escaping into the atmosphere, being fed by the way in which we continue to choose to fuel our vehicles, propel our vehicles, heat our homes, light our factories.
All right. Anyway, let's go a little deeper on their points so we can understand their perspective. Number 1, power disperses in a post-superpower world. And yeah, so side note, they really love their tongue twisters, don't they? And I quote, "Most citizens would agree that our community of world leaders, including the G7 and G20, largely fell short in tackling the COVID-19 pandemic. Since the pandemic eased, the reality is we haven't had enduring global leadership on much, and it's hard to imagine that changing soon. This is partly because superpowers are terribly burdened with global wars and domestic challenges. End of quote. Global wars and domestic challenges, entirely self-made problems that they created via their own incompetence. Or it's intentional, and they want the chaos. Either way, the problems were self-made. Number 2, a big election year won't stop our reoccurring crisis of political legitimacy. And it's true, because we all see the Uniparty for what it is. They lost trust, and it's not coming back. They screwed us over every step of the way, and everyone across the political spectrum sees it. And really, I think we just disagree with the solutions. This is true of the entire world, not just the United States. And I quote again, everyone has rightly noted how 2024 is the biggest election year in history, with around half the world going to the polls. This, of course, could still be complicated by AI disinformation, cyber threats, or simply accusations of rigging, as we have seen in countries like Bangladesh, Venezuela, and the United States. End of quote. Do you see what the establishment has done to us? They have made our election process such a joke that we're on a list with Bangladesh and Venezuela. But we do have a simple solution. You could just hold free and fair elections, but that won't happen, because without control, they have nothing. Because no one believes in their vision for global technocracy. So, yeah. Now, the rest of this section is lamenting democracy failing. But the reality is, that's a self-made problem as well. Global leaders have entirely ditched democratic ideals. Most of the West has fallen victim to authoritarianism. Just look at what's happening in the UK, Australia, New Zealand, Spain, France, the US, and Canada. Pretty much everywhere. They can't even allow their citizens to speak freely. None of this is democratic, it's authoritarian. And then we have number 3, a more complex global mental health crisis. And this one again is very, very ironic. Now I know, we've already talked about this one, but I want to read this to you because it shows they know exactly what they are doing. And I quote, according to the WHO, the pandemic was the greatest threat to mental health since the Second World War. Many of us are still struggling to catch up in our personal and professional lives, yet other challenges to post-pandemic mental health are increasing thanks to climate change and AI. Oh man, I can't take how stupid these people are. We are governed by absolute idiots. But I'm going to try to get through this, so let's continue. And I quote again from the World Economic Forum. First, therapists say climate change is generating a new type of anxiety, leading to a sense of alienation that makes it hard to function. This eco-anxiety, as they call it, is likely to escalate as governments fail to transition away from fossil fuels fast enough. End of quote. I don't even know how to put this, but I hope you see what I mean. But, man, they are perpetuating the climate anxiety in that statement even. Blaming governments for not moving fast enough to save people from this so-called fiery doom. That's doing the exact thing they're warning about. They are very clearly perpetuating the mental health crisis with this messaging alone. And right after they say this, they'll give a speech about how we're all gonna die unless they stop cows from burping. Do they have any semblance of self-reflection, any introspective abilities at all? It doesn't seem like they do. Or, on the other hand, they're just evil. I don't know, you can figure that out for yourself. Now this next part is also very interesting, and I quote again. Second, artificial intelligence is being imposed on us whether we like it or not. Many will feel they do not fit into this AI-driven economy, or are not even being offered a chance, creating a greater precariat class who feels left behind. Feeling redundant will exacerbate our occupational identity crisis, which is going to bleed into the global health mental challenges. They go on to say that they can forecast that 50% of jobs will be wiped out by 2027, and a violent backlash against artificial intelligence is inevitable, as many are going to feel left behind by this transition. End of quote. You know, it's a real interesting statement. Artificial intelligence is being imposed on us whether we like it or not. And then of course they mention one of Yuval Harari's favorite topics, the incoming useless class.
Full entities in the world. After thousands of years, during which humans were the rulers of the world, authority and power will shift away from humans to computers, and most humans will become economically useless and politically powerless. Already today, we are beginning to see the creation of a new class of humans, the useless class. Just as the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century created the new working class, the proletariat, so now the artificial intelligence revolution is beginning to create the useless class.
Alright, so now we have number 4, the era of global shocks. And we're going to breeze through these just to finish up the video. Now, as you're about to see, I don't have much of a critique on this part, but it's still important because they have some very specific ideas in mind, oddly specific. Number 1, a new extremist group emerges. With the world distracted with multiple major wars and leadership in decline, this could be an opportunistic time for a new extremist group to make its mark, and maybe not face as many consequences. And perhaps this new group of terrorists will use artificial intelligence to kick off a new phase of terrorism. End of quote. Alright, so number 1, starting off with a bang. New terror group using artificial intelligence. Alright then. Number 2, one of Klaus Schwab's favorites, a cyber pandemic that is intentional. The massive IT outage that affected the entire world back in July was not terrorism, but simply a faulty software update from a cybersecurity firm. And yeah, side note, they're talking about the CrowdStrike fiasco, I believe, and I'm not too sure that was an accident. Kinda felt like a test run, but let's keep going. It cost Fortune 500 companies $5.4 billion in damages and shut down flights, banks, hospitals, retailers, and other services worldwide. Imagine if a bad actor did this, on purpose, an even grander scale. End of quote. Now, as we talked about before, the FBI is warning about this for the 2024 election, so it does seem to be on the table for possibilities. And then we have number 3, where they actually predict that an island is going to sink. And they plan to use this as some sort of impetus to get everybody on board with the Agenda 2030 initiative. So yeah, those all seem very oddly specific to me. Either way, if any of those things happen, it's going to be a wild ride. Interesting choices for calamity though, right? Alright, so the last thing I want to mention is this. There was a lot of talk in here about the post-pandemic era and mental health. And I think this is probably worth noting. The World Economic Forum has admitted that the little situation we had in 2020 served as a test of the public's willingness to comply with government mandates. This is from an article entitled My Carbon: How to Build Sustainable Cities. And right there at number 1, and I quote, a huge number of unimaginable restrictions for public health were adopted by billions of citizens around the world, from social distancing to contact tracing, and it demonstrated the core of individual social responsibility. End of quote. What an interesting way to put it, don't you think? Yeah. Wow. COVID was a social responsibility test, huh? However, it gets worse, because at the end, they discuss how this could be adopted and studied to implement restrictions on lifestyle and behavior. And they say, and I quote, how to reduce our lifestyle emissions. Yeah, so they're alluding to the possibility of using these types of restrictions for climate lockdowns. However, I don't think people are going to be so quick to comply this time. Only time will tell though. You just have to keep in mind, everything they do revolves around social engineering. Their public-private partnerships are essentially outsourcing their most authoritarian goals to the corporate sector.
I think we're asking companies, you have to force behaviors, and at BlackRock we are forcing behaviors. What we are doing internally is, if you don't achieve these levels of impact, your compensation could be impacted, okay? You have to force behaviors.
So, here's the idea. They believe they can change behavior on a corporate level and have that behavioral modification trickle down to the consumer. Yes, that's right. We've gone from trickle-down economics to trickle-down social engineering. It's all about pulling the strings of the human mind. So, I can only suggest one thing: to cut those strings. Once again, this is HelioWave. If you like the content, like, comment, and subscribe. Share the video if you want to. If you're in a position to, consider subscribing on Locals, or you could use PayPal. As always, make sure you disobey those true fascistas, and yes, I do hope you have a good night.